Homage to the Triple Gem. So warm greetings, everybody. And this is Bhante Joe. I've just arrived back to Sri Lanka from a lovely trip in Thailand. And was thinking a little bit about when I went to Thailand 10 years ago as a young monk. One of the things that really struck me there was just how silent everybody was. And I remember the monks would come back from their pindapata. On their pindapata, they would not really speak. And they would return to the sala, and when they returned to the sala, they wouldn't be speaking. Speak very little, just a few words here or there, a few sentences. And then after that, they would go their separate ways. Some would stay on what they call the asana, the seat where the monks sit, and continue meditating, and others would go back to their kuti before the meal. And this time, that kind of impression continued in a way, and we kind of all gathered together for this memorial for Ajahn Chah. And there were 600 monks and thousands of lay people. And it's an incredible experience to gather with hundreds and hundreds of people in silence, just with the intention to offer a puja to a respected teacher who had done so much for those of us who are ordained in his tradition. And for the Buddhist world in general, for those who benefited from his teachings, either directly or indirectly. So there's a power to words, and there's also a power to lack of words. There's a power to silence, which is why the Buddha gave a lot of importance to right speech as a factor on the Noble Eightfold Path. So learning how to navigate the realm of speech is extremely important if one wants to be successful in one's practice. Speech can function as something that can spur one on, or it can function as something that holds one back in ways that are both possible to think about rationally and ways that one might not actually think about until one experiences a blockage because of speech. So continuing on with the discussion about silence, we'll go in reverse order, maybe of the factors of right speech, roughly. Roughly reverse order. We'll start with the last one at least. The last one is what they call Samphappalāpa. Samphappalāpa means idle speech. You kind of get this sense of kind of Samphappalāpa. Even the word is a little bit of an onomatopoeia, and it sounds like just kind of people sitting there and popping. In the culture that I grew up in, we used to call it popping off at the mouth. People just kind of start talking. So there's two ways that one can kind of take this teaching on idle speech. And one of them is to be a little bit relaxed about it, kind of very relaxed, because actually in the suttas, the Buddha is seen to be engaging in the exchanges of friendly greetings and pleasantries with people, usually when they arrive from a journey, but also there's a sutta in which he's engaged in exchanging friendly greetings and pleasantries with a group of Brahmins, and I think somebody comes and interrupts him, and then a Dhamma discussion starts. So the Buddha is the foremost in our example in everything. And so it's possible to take this, okay, there's this exchange of friendly greetings and pleasantries, and it's fine to do that. You can kind of have like some, light talk as much as you want. And to be very, very relaxed about that. And that can create an atmosphere of relaxation. One of the things that you notice with really skilled teachers is that they actually have the ability to change the atmosphere. It's something that's really remarkable. And I remember my very first time coming to live at a Buddhist center, which was a Zen center. And the teacher there, he had this remarkable ability to just like change the atmosphere for all of us who were living at the center. So he could change it and make it very tense, and kind of through the way that he acted, he could be very ferocious. And then suddenly, if he felt the atmosphere was too tight, he would flip and he'd start telling jokes, and it would suddenly become very light. And he'd even do some kind of very, I call like extreme or unusual jokes. So I remember I'd be walking just on the hallways sometimes, and I'd turn around and I'd catch him sneaking up behind me. He's kind of ready to give me this kind of punch on the head. They called it an albam. So he'd kind of sneak up behind you if you weren't paying attention. He'd punch you on the head. Not hard. So he had this kind of very light-hearted side to him. And there's a lot of stories. He would do some very, very unusual things sometimes to lighten the mood. They have this crazy wisdom tradition in Zen. And at the same time, he could be very, very ferocious. So it's possible to take this lighter side of Samphappalāpa and become too light. And if that happens, and what one may notice, what can happen relatively quickly, is that one's practice can actually get blocked. The ways in which one would normally feel one is progressing in meditation can come to a halt. And actually what this is, it's a lack of renunciation. because past a certain point when one is engaging with people in a conversation or, just kind of talking idly, what starts to happen is that you bond with other people. Now, this isn't necessarily bad. I mean, everything is a kind of balance in terms of the Dhamma. But this bonding, this kind of talking, this kind of engagement when it goes on for long, long periods of time, and it's not about the Dhamma, it's just about some other topic, then you kind of create this glue between people that's around something that's outside of what we're trying to achieve in our practice. And that very attachment serves as a block to the efforts that we put forth in meditation. So it's sometimes hard to even gauge where that blockage is coming from. It can actually come from this kind of Samphappalāpa, popping off at the mouth. So, came to live at a monastery one time, and I was really, really serious kind of going there. And kind of didn't want to talk to anybody. And I actually came to that monastery for that purpose. And assumed and heard that there was quite a lot of independence there. But as time went on, I kind of noticed that one of the most senior monks, or not the most senior monk, but the one who's kind of running the place a little bit, he started to get like more and more aggressive to me. And eventually I started to be able to perceive over a course of a number of years that, okay, he's actually aggressive to me because he wants me to like talk and wants me to like relax and tell jokes. And this was not like a really senior monk. He's senior to me by like 1 or 2 years. So we're kind of peers. So I didn't look to him as a teacher or anything like this, but I thought maybe I should just try to adjust to this culture. And so I did. I tried to become like more relaxed and, eventually started to like, just joke and, hang around. I've always been telling jokes. I don't think there's ever a time that I've really stopped telling jokes, but it was something that started to dovetail and have conversations that were long, like hours long. And this was happening frequently. And one of the things that one can notice in those situations is that no matter what one does, one's meditation doesn't seem to go well. And one doesn't find joy in meditation. And this is actually coming from the intention factor, essentially, of the Noble Eightfold Path. You don't have the intention to renounce. You don't have the intention to renounce attachments and engagements with other people. And that very intention is what can hold one back. Now, on the other side with this idle speech, when I first ordained as a young monk, I became like very, very serious, actually, kind of like super serious. And I gradually started to notice that, there was one time these 2 very senior monks came from Thailand, and one of them was really offended with the way that I was behaving, kind of really highly respected monks. It's kind of like I was very, very serious. I never smiled, I never laughed, and I was always trying to do everything like super diligent and do things really quick, and it had this whole vibe of being very like tense and intense and brittle in a way. So the one monk, one of the 2 senior monks, he basically kind of ignored me and didn't want anything to do with me and seemed angry whenever I was around him. The other monk, he maybe felt a little bit more affinity to me and like compassion. Maybe he went through similar things as a young monk. And I remember I asked him a question about my Dhamma practice once, and he said to me, our practice should be making us more and more calm, more and more peaceful, more and more at ease, essentially. It's kind of more and more like uptight and rough. And this is something that I noticed in almost all of the very senior, what we call Kruba Ajahns in the Thai tradition, is that they both had a seriousness to them and also a lightness, and kind of this balance of these 2 qualities that allowed them to approach the difficult parts of practice with an energy that wasn't heavy, that wasn't overbearing. They were able to hold their life and their practice in a way that was light. Although they were serious about their practice, it wasn't something that bore down on them. So actually in Thailand, just before I came, there's a monk there who I really respect, who was my Tudong teacher when I was a young monk. And I was extremely happy to have the chance to connect with him again. So he gave a Dhamma talk before we left. And in that Dhamma talk, he was describing this incident that he had where he was coming back from somewhere in the monastery, and he bumped into this monk he hadn't seen in a long time. And he said to him, "So how are you doing?" And the other monk said, he said, "Well, I'm not an arahant, so I still have dukkha." And then the way that he said his response is actually quite funny. He has a British accent. He said, "Yeah, it was a bit much. It was a bit much of an answer." It was something that kind of kept me laughing and also made me think for a while. So this Samphappalāpa, this idle speech, is something that one has to hold in a way that's balanced. But when one sees it held well, things are quite silent, but they don't have to be too heavy. They're silent, but they're friendly. Silent and not brittle, also flexible. And what that usually works out to, practically speaking, is that when you're around people, sometimes you have like conversations lasting a few minutes or a couple sentences that you go on your way, and that's it. You come back, you have duties to do, you do them together. There isn't like a tension in the air, like you can cut the air with the knife. And that's something that can be a support for practice, both the silence and the friendliness. It's something that has to be held with balance, this Samphappalāpa, speaking idly. Another one is divisive speech. So divisive speech essentially means kind of speaking behind people's back or even to their face with other people in ways that will divide people from one another. Now, divisive speech is another one which has to be held well, because there are actually times in which people are a danger or a threat. And so one doesn't want to just ignore that and allow a danger to continue. So you can see that in the case of Devadatta with the Buddha. He spoke quite harshly about him. He spoke about him behind his back, and he told people not to associate with him. And that's not the only time that occurs in the canon. That occurs in many different places in the canon, and there's even ways in the Vinaya in which monks can separate monks from the entire Sangha using what they call Sangha transactions. And obviously the lead up to that would involve some kind of speech that divides people from one another. But in the main, the way that that kind of speech can play out is that you don't just go and say negative things about, every single person that you meet and kind of looking for their flaws or delighting in the kind of political gaming and backstabbing and back and forth that can become typical when humans get together. Because essentially what that dovetails into very quickly is a desire for power. Whether it's a small group or a large group, one wants to divide people and form alliances to cement one's power. So the opposite thing is true when one is engaging in measured divisive speech for the sake of evaluating whether or not one can continue to associate with a particular person in terms of one's growth in the Dhamma. And that's something that can be important to do in like relatively rare situations, hopefully. Hopefully that's not coming up like all the time. If it is, maybe it's better to find a different situation. So this again is another area in which speech has to be held in balance. So another one is lying. Now this is an interesting mode of speech in that there is no place in the canon where the Buddha recommends telling a deliberate lie. So almost all the other types of speech, you can see him engaging in it. But you don't see the Buddha ever engaging in deliberate lying from the time of his enlightenment to the time of his death. So I was once walking in a subway and walking with another monk, and this guy came up to me and the other monk, and he said, "How do you follow the precept around lying?" And I said, "I can't tell my boss everything that I think about him." It's kind of, yeah, well, you can't. You'd probably get fired pretty quick if you told your boss everything that you think about him. So lying here doesn't mean withholding information. What it means is deliberately misstating the truth. So for example, if you're with one's husband or wife or something like this, and they come in and they say, "What do you think of my hairdo?" And you really don't like it. But if you say, "Yeah, I don't like your hairdo," that wouldn't go down very well. So instead you can say something like, "Oh, I like your shoes." And if you like their shoes, then that's not a deliberate lie. And it may be the case that they think that you like their hairdo then, but it's not your obligation necessarily to say that. But this again is something that has to be held with a sense of balance, because it's something that has kamma to it. If somebody is engaging in speech that's not a deliberate lie, that tips into deception too often for reasons that are not necessary, then actually that's something that generates kamma. The kamma in which one is misleading people And that kind of misleading can have consequences for one's ability to see truths or falsehoods in one's own mind, and especially in one's own intentions. So this precept around lying is another one that has to be held balanced. There's actually a really interesting story in the canon with Jīvaka, who was the Buddha's physician. And King Bimbisara, he sends him to this king in the south named King Chandapajjota. Chanda, I think it means violent. The translation of his name means violent. Any Pali scholars out there can correct me. And Chandapajjota has this very bad illness that can only be cured with ghee. So Jīvaka goes to Chandapajjota and says to him, you need to take some ghee. Oh no, before he even meets him, he says, I'll take any medicine, I think, but ghee. Ghee is loathsome to me. And then Jīvaka thinks to himself, there's no way that he can be cured except if he takes ghee. So he gets some ghee, mixes it up, but he gets a whole bunch of herbs and puts them in with the ghee and mixes them up so that it smells and tastes like an astringent decoction, which is a type of medicine that's there in Ayurveda. So then he gives it to the king and he says, drink an astringent decoction. But before he does all this, he knows the king's really violent. So he goes to the stables and he says, at this time of the year, doctors are gathering herbs. So it would be good if, he says that to the king. At this time of the year, doctors are gathering herbs. So it would be good if the king gave orders at the stable. Anytime Jīvaka wants to go, let him go, and let him take whatever horse he wants. So he set this whole thing up before giving the king the ghee that tasted like an astringent decoction. Immediately after he gives it to him, he goes to the stable and takes the fastest horse and leaves. So the king realizes that he's been given ghee, gets really angry, and demands that Jīvaka get brought back. And so he sends this extremely fast. In the canon, it says kind of like a deva-like being to catch up with him. So the deva-like being catches up with Jīvaka as he's sitting and eating his meal. And Jīvaka has this kind of piece of myrobalan, It's this little fruit that is often used as a laxative. And he gives one to this non-human being. The non-human being says, come back. He's like, first take some myrobalan. He puts the myrobalan in his mouth. So then the non-human being eats the myrobalan, and Jīvaka spits the myrobalan out. And then the non-human being feels, oh my gosh, he must have given me poison. So he says, will there be life for me, master? And he says, don't worry, you'll be fine. Just take this horse that I took and bring it back to King Chandapajjota. So having done all that, he goes to King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara says, Jīvaka, it's good that you left because King Chandapajjota is violent. He would have had you killed. And then later, King Chandapajjota gets cured and he thinks to himself, it's good that Jīvaka left because I would have killed him. And after he's totally cured, he sends Jīvaka a robe. So this is a story from the Vinaya Pitaka, the rules for the monks. And it's meant to illustrate the kind of limits of what you can do around right speech with lying. Because there are these situations that a person encounters in life in which you have to withhold information, but you can't deliberately misstate the truth. But again, this is something that has to be held well. So the final one that we'll discuss is harsh speech. Harsh speech basically means speaking in a way that's very rough, very angry towards other people. And when you speak in this way towards other people, the attraction to it is that usually people do what you say initially. If you keep doing it, though, then they'll usually find ways in which to actually stop you in your ambitions to dominate them and control them. And you can see this on the small scale with bullies in school. You can see it on the large scale with nation states. This kind of speech that's belligerent and crass and desiring usually for dominance. It's usually why people engage in that speech. Oftentimes they may also engage in it in a reactionary way. So this is the type of speech one wants to pull back from by talking in ways that are gentle and kind. But again, we have this example from the great masters of the modern era. And what you tend to find with Buddhist monks is that they're very, very kind, but they're also not pushovers. So you don't want to mess around with with some of the senior monks that you meet. They won't hesitate to throw you out of the monastery or sometimes say something to you that's very, very harsh. So I remember there were times when I was a young monk and I would sometimes ask these questions that were very, very probing and argumentative and all just meant to trip people up. I was kind of that type of character. And I learned after doing this enough times that if I asked that from senior monks, then they would say things to me that would embarrass me in front of like a huge group of people. They would speak very harshly to me. And so I quickly learned not to ask questions, well, not quickly, but eventually learned not to ask questions in that way. So this harsh speech is one that one has to, again, hold in balance. And one learns the right time to do that and the right proportions to do that. Usually the right time and proportions to do that is if there's somebody who is trying to dominate you, which was essentially what I was trying to do with these really annoying questions. It's an attitude of dominance, trying to pick holes in the way that people are teaching or saying things and show how clever you are. Kind of, if you have an attitude behind something like that, and you just let that pass, and sometimes the person can become increasingly aggressive. Now, there are stories in the canon which recommend just tolerating these kinds of things, and it can be skillful to do that quite often. What you'll tend to see more often when teachers engage in harsh speech, it's when they feel people have potential. They'll speak to them more harshly. If they start to slip up, they'll speak harshly, and it's so that they can self-correct. They learn through the harshness of the speech, wait, something's going wrong here. And that's usually a prelude to the type of karma that they're going to get if they keep acting in a particular way, if they keep talking in a particular way. So there's one time in my young monastic life that I kept getting into arguments over the monastic rules. And I remember I went to this one monastery and I kept getting into arguments with one of the senior Vinaya teachers there. And I was this junior monk. I was just kind of going around like arguing about the Vinaya. And the way that the most senior monk and that Vinaya teacher handled it was really skillful, because what they did, they just tolerated at first my increasingly brazen arguments in the Vinaya. Kept tolerating it. And then there was a certain point in which I argued in such a way that it crossed a line, and even I recognized it crossed the line. And so they waited until that point, almost like like you're waiting to spring a trap on an animal. And after that point came, they started speaking to me really harshly. Like they were just ready to speak to me harshly. Like anything I said, anything I did, they were like anything was ready. They were ready to kind of speak to me in a very harsh way. And it was because of their skillfulness that actually I was able to, mostly abandon that habit from my young monk's life after that time. Because what that kind of non-verbal way of teaching by waiting for the right time and then basically showing you, like, look, you keep doing this, you're out of the monastery. But not just that, this is the kind of karma that you're going to get from that type of speech. They showed it through their actions. And as a result, it was really helpful, actually, for me to change. So you'll tend to see people employ this type of speech as practitioners of the Dhamma if they feel that somebody has the potential to benefit from it. Usually if you're in a teaching position, you'll do that with great care and rarely. But on a peer-to-peer level, or somebody who almost has no potential at all, it's almost much more effective to ignore them and just basically maneuver in such a way that they're no longer able to interact with you or be a part of your life. Another time when it can be skillful to do this is when you have a belligerent person who you may not feel you ever want to interact with, or doesn't have any potential to be your Dhamma friend or anything like this, but they're actually trying to attack you. They're trying to take you down, and it can be skillful at times to respond. I mean, not in ways that would be something that would be against the principles of the Dhamma. So as monks, we have rules about insulting people, etc., but in ways that are quite forceful, So they know, you're not going to be able to push me over. So this is something that has to be held with skill. And when this teaching on right speech is held with skill, mostly we speak gently, mostly we speak kindly, you become a person who has these dual qualities, like you see in the senior monks. A person who has the ability to make the situation tense and actually instill fear. And also the person who has the ability to make the situation very light and very calming. Because those two qualities are actually counters to defilements that can arise both internally and externally. So if a person can use that speech skillfully, they can counter the defilements externally and the dangers that arise externally and protect themselves. And they can also help situations become more conducive to practice in general. But this is something that you're going to encounter more if you're in a position of being in some kind of authority position, some kind of a teacher or somebody who's running a center, somebody who's managing a group, something like this. Or if you're a parent, or if whatever, something like this in your position of authority, trying to help other people. So all of these teachings on right speech are something that has to be held with skill. But saying that it has to be held with skill doesn't mean that it's a blank check to basically overthrow what the Buddha has essentially stated about these types of speech. That one should speak little, that one should speak the truth, that one should speak gently, that one should speak in such a way that conduces to harmony. In the main, this is the way that one practices. This is the way that one conducts oneself. And this is a way of engaging with speech that will support one's practice so that one doesn't find that there are so many blocks coming from speech in one's meditation. One's speech is a benefit to oneself, it's a benefit to others, it's something that helps one move one forward on the path to Nibbana, so long as it's held with skill, so long as it's developed in the way that the Buddha trained himself and teaches us to train ourselves.